Hello everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is June 27th, 2024, and we have some very fun topics to talk about today. So, we're going to open up with a topic I'm less than excited about, but we're going to get out of the way first. We're going to talk about the end of the Stanley Cup Finals. And then we're going to talk about the CFL Week 3 stories. And we're going to recap my predictions from them. And then we're going to move on to my predictions for next week in the CFL. And we're going to close out talking about the Swift Current Broncos 2024-25 schedule. We got a bunch to talk about today. Let's get into it. Congratulations to the 2023-2024 Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers. They had a really impressive playoff run, and Sergei Bobrovsky just put the team on his back all throughout the playoff run. And unsurprisingly, the only time the Panthers struggled is when he struggled as well. The Panthers just kind of walked through the first 3 rounds, and they went up 3-0 against the Oilers, who I had picked since before round 1 to win the Stanley Cup. And though he struggled in game 4, 5, and 6, Bobrovsky really got it together in Game 7 and put together a tremendous game to cap off a tremendous playoff run. And I just want to give a special congratulations to one of my favorite players in the NHL, former St. Louis Blues player Vladimir Tarasenko. Tarasenko is one of my favorite players in the league, so I just wanted to acknowledge that specifically. To my fellow Blues fans, look at our boy. He's all grown up. It pains me to watch him win a championship with another team, but regardless, I am glad he has his second ring. As for the Oilers, they had a really special run this year. From being seemingly down and out in round 2 against Vancouver to just dominating round 3 and going down 3-0 in the Stanley Cup final just to bring it back to force a Game 7. That is a tremendous story. And I am genuinely sad that the Oilers couldn't finish the Cinderella story. But at the same time, the Panthers also deserved the championship. They had one of the best teams this year. I doubted their depth all season long. But when it came down to it in Game 7, their depth really pulled them through this game. And Sergei Bobrovsky as well had, as I mentioned before, a tremendous game to cap off a tremendous playoff run. Now, notably, Connor McDavid actually has become the first player since 2003 to win the Conn Smythe Trophy despite not winning the Stanley Cup. Now, a lot of people are making a big deal about the fact that he didn't go out there and accept the trophy. But at the end of the day, you just lost the biggest game of your career. A game that one day, if he doesn't end up winning a Stanley Cup down the road, that game could end up defining his legacy. So, there's a lot of emotions. And I fully understand why McDavid went to the locker room right away instead of waiting to see if he was going to be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. I fully understand that. Because to him, he's looking at it and he's thinking, this is the wrong trophy. This isn't the trophy I wanted. Now, I know 10, 15 years down the road, he's going to look back on this trophy and realize what a tremendous performance he had throughout the entire playoffs. He put up an absolutely absurd 42 points in the playoffs. That is the 4th most in NHL history. A tremendous run for McDavid. And unfortunately, the Oilers were just not able to finish it. As for the future of the Edmonton Oilers, I think the 3 things they got to do. 1, they got to make sure McDavid never leaves. Ever. He needs to be an Oiler for life if the Oilers want to stay competitive throughout his entire career. I don't think there's any real chance of him leaving unless Leon Draisaitl if Leon Draisaitl does not re-sign with the Oilers this offseason, don't be shocked if when McDavid's contract is up, he goes wherever Leon goes. Now, with that said, I don't think Leon's leaving Edmonton. I don't think so in the slightest. I think Draisaitl and McDavid are Oilers for life. I can't see them ever leaving. And as long as those two are around, the Oilers have a tremendous base to put together another genuinely competitive team next season that, who knows, they might end up winning the Stanley Cup next season. I don't know. I think the Oilers will have a real shot if they can keep the majority of this roster together. Maybe move Cody Ceci and bring in a better defenseman, but that's just my opinion. To me, Cody Ceci is the biggest weakness for the Oilers. Now, I want to talk about one of the biggest strengths for the Oilers going forward. Stuart Skinner. Now, I'm going to admit, I am biased. I am. I watched Stuart Skinner play junior hockey in Swift Current. I think Skinner is a tremendous player, and I think he has a very bright future in the NHL. I think he has the potential to not just be a consistent starting goalie for Edmonton like he was this season, but as his career progresses and he becomes a better and better player, I think he might end up becoming one of the best goalies in the league. He showed a lot of poise in the Stanley Cup, especially after being pulled earlier in the playoffs. So for him to come in and have 4 tremendous games in the Stanley Cup, 4, 5, 6, and 7, despite losing in 7, Skinner really had a good run. And I think going forward, if the Oilers can keep together the core of Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Stuart Skinner together, if they can keep that core together and maybe extend Chris Knobloch for a couple more seasons, I think they have a real chance to win the Stanley Cup before the decade is out. As for what I think is going to happen next season, it's hard to say because the NHL is going to have a lot of changes this year. Everything from a team relocating from Arizona to Utah to potential major names such as Mitch Marner changing teams. And we've already seen Allmark be moved from the Bruins to the Senators. This is going to be a very chaotic offseason. So it's hard to make a prediction for the 24-25 season. All I know is I'm already excited for hockey to return next year, and I can't wait to see how this offseason plays out. On to the recap of Week 3 in the CFL. So, the week opened up with Montreal defeating Ottawa as I predicted. Not an overly surprising result. Montreal is probably the best team in the CFL, or at very least they're one of the best. They have such a well-rounded team. They've got a tremendous defense headed up by Darrell Sankey and Sean Lemon, who, although I don't think Lemon should be playing at the moment, at the end of the day he is playing, and he has had a really big impact on the Alouettes' defense so far. And then on the offensive side, you've got Cody Fajardo, who's just off to a flying start this season. Between him and Philpott, the air game has been next to unstoppable for Montreal. It has been absurd to watch. Cody Fajardo passed for 393 yards in just the last game, with Philpott getting 150 of those receptions. Those two have just been money since the Grey Cup last season. And then over on the Ottawa side, they put up more of a fight than I thought they would. They got over 20 points. I wasn't really expecting that, but to me, that is a very good sign for Ottawa, as they are very early into a rebuild. And specifically, Julian Grant had 116 yards, which wasn't even the highest in the game because Philpott, had that 150 as I mentioned before. But Grant had a really good game. 116 yards on 10 targets. Very good. The rush game, as I mentioned, has been a little bit underwhelming this season. Montreal had a total of 96 rushing yards, and only 45 of those came from Fletcher. But I can't see that being a trend that continues as we get deeper and deeper into the season, I think Fletcher is going to start to find his stride, and I won't be shocked if he gets to the point where he's averaging right around 100 yards a game. It was a surprisingly intense game. I didn't think it would be less than a 30-point win for Montreal, although it was almost 30. I didn't think Ottawa would even get more than 20. So the fact they did, to me, that is a very good sign for Ottawa fans. And then we move on to Winnipeg and BC. I predicted BC would win this game. Unsurprisingly, they did. BC is probably the best team in the West, in my opinion. Yes, they're not undefeated like the Riders are, but BC has had a harder schedule than most teams to start out the season. And what should have been a really, really notable matchup early in the season between them and Winnipeg ended up just being the story of Alexander Hollins, who just had an absurd game. He got over 200 yards receiving, which is just absurd. Hollins had a game that could potentially mark the breakout of a new star in the CFL. VA looked really sharp as well, although there is a chance he might not play in next week's game. We will get to that. I think BC is the favorite to win the Grey Cup right now, in my opinion. And Winnipeg, how they're playing right now, I think speaks to the mentality they have in Winnipeg, unfortunately. Winnipeg wants to win without changing anything from their last two Grey Cup victories in 19 and 21. Because they think that they have the exact same caliber players that they did in those two seasons. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the players on Winnipeg, they are a very, very skilled team of players. Jefferson, he is one of the most terrifying defensive ends in the league, but he's not having a great start to the season. Zach Collaros, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, a shoe-in future Hall of Famer, and he is struggling right now. And as if things weren't already scary enough for Winnipeg, Dalton Schoen is now out for at least 6 weeks, probably longer. Things are only getting worse in Winnipeg. Now, I don't think it's quite time to hit the panic button, but I think it's time to consider installing a panic button just in case things don't get better this season. Now, I'm not saying blow up the team. No, not by any means. I think Winnipeg needs to make a slow transition into a younger team, but I think that should start this season. I think they need to move at least one of their older players and try and get some younger players at the same position, maybe a little bit of draft capital as well. I would say probably the best bet for someone to move, you would probably find them in the receiving core, although I'm not necessarily sure who you would move. Because you also want to try and keep some older players to mentor the young players you're bringing in. But again, that's 5-6 weeks, maybe longer down the road. Winnipeg should be nervous at the moment, but I don't think it's time to blow up the team. But it is time to install the button to hit if you want to do so. And then we move on to Toronto and Edmonton. One of the surprising stories to me this season has been Cameron Dukes. Now, Dukes isn't playing at an all-star level. Like, he's a very average quarterback, very mid-tier in the CFL. But at the same time, he's doing enough this season to get Toronto wins. Toronto, I thought, would be in a lot of trouble without Kelly and losing Ouellette. I know they brought in Kadeem Carey, but I thought they'd be in a lot of trouble at least through these 9 games that Kelly will be suspended. But meanwhile, Cameron Dukes, he's not playing to the level Chad Kelly was last season. Not by any means. But at the end of the day, he's playing well enough for Toronto to get out to a 2-0 start. They beat Edmonton this week, unsurprisingly. And I think it is very notable that the Elks, they had a really good game through the air, but that wasn't enough to win. Toronto won on a walk-off field goal. And here's the thing. MBT threw for 342 yards. That should be enough to win a game, especially when you have 4 touchdowns. But in his return to Toronto, it wasn't enough to win, despite Dylan Mitchell having 120 yards plus a touchdown, Hoji Mayala, Curly Gittins Jr., and Geno Lewis all finding the end zone in that game. That wasn't enough. And I think the big issue is Edmonton's O-line. Yes, the O-line. The position that everyone likes to blame, but no one likes to fix. And I think it would have been an easy fix for Edmonton. I think if Edmonton hadn't gone out and spent way too much money on a quarterback they didn't need in McLeod Bethel Thompson, they'd be in a lot better of a spot if they had spent said money on an O-line for Trey Ford. Now, I don't think Trey Ford would be putting up the numbers that MBT is at the moment, but at the same time, I think Edmonton could have maybe won at least one of their close games by now if they had a decent O-line. And that lack of an O-line, though it's not impacting the pass game all that much because Bethel Thompson is such a patient and confident quarterback in the pocket, but that lack of an O-line is really impacting their ground game, which has been honestly incredibly disappointing so far to start the season. Edmonton was supposed to have one of the best ground games in the CFL this season, and through the first 3 weeks, they have not. They've had a really painful ground game to watch. And then we're going to close up with Saskatchewan and Hamilton. Now, let's put it this way. When Trevor Harris is in the game, the Rough Riders are one of the best offensive teams in the game. When he is not in the game, as we saw this past week, when he had a scale and hurt his knee that he did not hurt last season. Last season he blew out his left knee. This season he injured his right knee this past week. The Riders don't have much in the backfield without him. It doesn't matter how good Ouellette is. It doesn't matter how good the Riders receiving core is. It doesn't matter that they've improved their offensive line dramatically. That doesn't matter if the quarterback in the backfield isn't able to hit open targets. If he is running out of the pocket with no real reason to, none of the changes the Riders have made this season matter. The quarterback is the leader of the team. There's a reason captains in other teams get called the quarterback of the team. There's a reason the point guards in basketball are referred to the quarterback on the court. There's a reason that the quarterback is such a heavily used term outside of football. It's because they are the undisputed leader on the team. So when your undisputed leader on the team is struggling, which Shea Patterson was when Trevor Harris went down, you're not going to have a great time. Now, the Riders did manage to pull out the win because they had a really, really stellar first half that started off a fumble on the opening kickoff, which allowed them to get a touchdown on just the second play from scrimmage, which Samuel Emelis had a tremendous catch, tripped in the end zone, kept his focus, and still hauled in the ball. And then Ajoa also chimed in a little bit later with his first career touchdown. Massive congratulations to him on that. And AJ Ouellette looked like he was finally starting to find his stride in Saskatchewan. He had 98 rushing yards and 47 receiving yards. Ouellette is going to be the backbone for the Riders this season. He is the face of the new rough and tough style of football Corey Mace wants to install into Saskatchewan. So when he is having a good game, that is a very good sign for Saskatchewan. And now that he is starting to find his stride, I think the Riders, assuming Trevor Harris is back in their next game, which by the sounds of things he will be, I think AJ Ouellette will lead this team to tremendous things. I think the Riders might not get to the Grey Cup this season, but I think they might snag a home playoff game if they can keep this up. Now, I do want to point out, the Riders have played 3 games against 2 teams which are likely going to miss the playoffs. They beat Edmonton in week 1 and they beat Hamilton in week 2 and 3. Those teams are likely going to be on the outside looking in this season. But it's a good way for a Saskatchewan team that is trying to gel together. It's a good way for them to get some chemistry and get some momentum as they head into the real test after this bye week as they head into week 5. Now, as I mentioned, the Riders have the bye week this week, which could not come at a better time. The Riders are really beat up through these first 3 games. As I mentioned, Trevor Harris hurt his knee towards the end of the first half. AJ Ouellette spent most of the last game limping in between plays. And then there was a very scary injury in the second half where Marcus Sayers took a knee to the head as he went for a tackle. And he was left unconscious on the ground for quite a while. Now, he did walk off under his own power, but he was also very woozy and he had to lean on trainers to help him off the field, even though he could stand on his own. So, Sayers, who's coming off a really good game after having a awful Rough Rider debut in week 2, and he was finally starting to get some momentum, he took a pretty bad injury. I just hope he is okay. I think this bye week could not come at a better time for the Riders because it's going to give everyone some time to heal up after taking some very fluky injuries through the first couple weeks. Meanwhile, Hamilton, Bo Levi Mitchell, he should have retired after 2021. He should have went out after 2021 and handed the reins to Jake Mayo. Leave Calgary on a high note, leave the CFL on a high note, go become the tremendous panelist he will be one day. But no. He decided to sign in Hamilton. This has not worked out for him. And now the most recent evidence of this is his inability to connect with Tim White, the Hamilton Ticats star receiver. Now, whether this is White's fault, Bo's fault, I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to talk about is if Bo Levi does not start to put up the numbers that he is expected to in Hamilton, the Ticats do not have a shot to do any amount of damage this season. They will be the bottom of the league. They might be where Edmonton was 2 seasons ago. I think signing Bo might have been one of the biggest mistakes a football team has made in a long time in the CFL. I want to be proven wrong though. I do. Bo Levi is a future Hall of Famer. He is one of the greats. So to see him struggle like he has through the half season he had last year because of injuries and the start of this season, it brings me no joy. I want to see Bo Levi play like he has in the past, but I genuinely don't think we will see that this season. I don't think we'll see that next season. I don't think we'll see that again. I think Bo Levi needs to retire and go to the TSN panel, become a full-time panelist. He will be tremendous at that job, just like he was tremendous through his years in Calgary. Now, on to my week 4 predictions for the CFL. So we open up the week with BC and Edmonton. No surprise here, I'm taking BC. Like I've said a few times today, I think BC is one of the best teams in the CFL. Edmonton, they are going to be continuously dragged down by the lack of an offensive line until they do something about it. I don't think BC is going to have much of a problem in this game. Now, there are some reports saying Vernon Adams might not play for BC this week because of an injury. But I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world because BC still has a very skilled backup, Jake Dolegala. Jake made somewhat of a name for himself last season in Saskatchewan, taking the place of the injured Trevor Harris. Now, he didn't quite play like a superstar, but I mean, he showed a lot of good signs, and I think he's going to be a very solid backup for BC this season, just like he was a very solid backup for Saskatchewan last season. I can't really see there being much of a competition in this game. Edmonton might get some points and make the game look closer than it is, but I think both in terms of statistics and score, BC is just kind of going to run through Edmonton because, well, they're Edmonton. McLeod Bethel-Thompson isn't enough to fix this team. So then we go on to my game of the week, Montreal and Toronto. The two best teams in the East. What I am expecting to be the Eastern Conference Final again this season, just like it was last season. I'd say Montreal is probably the best team in the league. BC is one of the best. Montreal is the other half of that. I think they're the two best teams in the league, and it's a very close call between the two. Now, Toronto, they do look a lot better than I thought they would this season. Like I mentioned earlier, Dukes has done a great job filling in for Kelly. He has not necessarily been the superstar that some people might have been hoping he would be, but he has been good enough to consistently move the ball down the field and get Toronto their wins. But here's the thing. Montreal has a scary, scary team no matter who you are. As I mentioned before, the 1-2 punch of Darnell Sankey and Sean Lemon blitzing is going to be terrifying, especially to a young quarterback like Cameron Dukes. And then on offense, well, Cody Fajardo to Tyson Philpott. At this point, it is becoming a cheat code in the CFL. Philpott is going to have a great season if he keeps this up. Same with Cody. I think the one place where Toronto might be able to press an advantage is they can get more damage done on the ground with Kadeem Carey than Montreal might be able to do with Fletcher. Now, I think this could also end up being a big breakout week for Fletcher, as he'll look like the running back that Montreal was hoping he would become. So I think Montreal is the pick here. That's definitely my pick. I think they're the right one. But don't be surprised if this game goes the other way and Toronto upsets Montreal. And then we move on to Calgary and Winnipeg. Two teams headed in very different directions. Calgary is on an upswing after a rough 2023 season, and now they're looking like a actual team this year. And Jake Mayer is looking like himself that we had seen the previous couple seasons with him. Mayer has looked really good so far, and Calgary as a whole has as well. Meanwhile, Winnipeg, they do not look like the same team we have seen in recent seasons. As I mentioned before, this is an aging Winnipeg team, and there are going to be a lot of questions as the season goes on if they are playing like they were the last couple of years. I think Calgary is the right pick here, but if Winnipeg is going to start to turn things around, this is a good chance for them because they're going up against a team that could be a potential threat in the West this season. So if Winnipeg can bring them down, it could potentially give them some momentum headed forward. But I still think Calgary will win this game. And then we close out the week with Hamilton and Ottawa. Two teams that handled a rough 2023 season very, very differently. Ottawa just tore everything down and they have started their rebuild. Bob Dice is a great coach for this rebuild. I'm so glad he is finally getting a full-time shot to be a head coach. He did really good in his interim run with the Rough Riders, and he did really good in his interim run with the Red Blacks. So now that the Red Blacks have made him the full-time head coach, I think that is a great decision. And I think them beating Winnipeg a couple of weeks ago is a very good sign for this team. But Hamilton, on the other hand, They looked at a rough season last year and were like, well, we squeaked into the playoffs. Is it that bad of a season? Yes, Hamilton, it was an awful season. But yet, you stayed the course. You basically brought back almost everyone from last season. You added sales to your linebacking core after Simone Lawrence retired this offseason. But other than that, this is basically the same team they had last year, and they're expecting different results. I can't see that happening. I think that Ottawa will win this game, but at the same time, I don't know if it will be that big of a margin. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if this is the first game in the CFL this season to go to overtime. But at the end of the day, I think Ottawa will take these 2 points from the win. Just as I was finalizing the script for this episode, the Swift Current Broncos released their schedule for the 2024-2025 season. I haven't had a chance to properly dive into it yet and look at very notable things, but here are some things that popped out to me when I've just kind of been going over the schedule very loosely these last couple of days. So the season opens up September 20th at home against Saskatoon. I think that is going to be a very interesting game, as these will be two teams that will look significantly different from how they did last season. But I also think Swift Current's still going to have a solid team next season. So I'm still really excited for the season, even if we're going to look a lot different. And it's going to be very interesting because we will start the season with another team that's going to look a lot different from how they did last season. And then on October 19th, the Moose Jaw Warriors, the defending WHL champions, will come to Swift Current for the first time in the season. That's going to be a very interesting game. I think Moose Jaw will still have a decent team this season. Probably not a team that will win the WHL championship again, but I still think they will have the chance to win games against top teams in the league just because they have such a good coaching staff, and that's why they got to the WHL championship, let alone won it. Their players were tremendous, but their coaching staff was even better, and that says something. And then Matthew Ward returns to Swift Current for the first time on December 4th when his Medicine Hat Tigers come to Swift Current. It could be a very emotional night in Swift Current. I would not be shocked if the Broncos put together a video tribute for Ward. He was a very skilled player through his seasons with us, and he got us through some very rough seasons through his first couple years with the team. And even just thinking about it, I am getting somewhat emotional because he's one of my favorite players to play for the Broncos in recent years, and it is causing me to trip over my words some. So before I get too emotional, let's move on to a 7-game road trip that will start on January 19th in Saskatoon. The Broncos will then head to BC and play 5 games before going to Medicine Hat on February 7th and playing the last game of their road trip before returning home. And then the season ends March 22nd against Moose Jaw. Fan Appreciation Night is always one of my favorite nights. So yeah, it's going to be a fun night regardless of how the Broncos are and how the Warriors are. I'm just looking forward to this season. I can't wait to get back into it. And Bronco hockey's barely been gone a few months, and I'm already missing it. Let's just get the season going. But that is everything I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network over there. I hope you guys have a great day, a great night, a great whatever. Stay safe, stay strong, you got this. And this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk, signing off.